We've got a city, shtetl, somewhere in Russia, and there's like the city shtetl, and he does all the funerals, he does everything because he's the rabbi of the city. And the rabbi passes away. Right? Now he's the one that does all the funerals for everyone else, so they need to make a new rabbi. Now the problem is it takes months to appoint a new rabbi, and by then he needs to be buried. So who's going to bury the rabbi? So some guy from the shul comes up with an idea. He says, you know what, I'll appoint myself rabbi. Right? So he'll make himself a rabbi, and now that he's a rabbi, he can officiate the funeral. So someone tells him, but to officiate someone else as a rabbi, you have to yourself be a rabbi. So he says, well, since I officiated myself, I am a rabbi. Right? What would you say? Only a rabbi can appoint another person a rabbi. And he's claiming, I am a rabbi since I appointed myself. It's obviously a flawed argument. It obviously doesn't make sense. So what I want to speak about is maybe the talmudic places we see such arguments, right? And maybe we'll try justifying, well, I'll mention two arguments. Maybe I'll make it a bit shorter today. Two arguments for such a position, for such an argument, when it works, when it doesn't work, and maybe to make it make a bit more sense. Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with the standard example in the Talmud, and I'll bring a whole bunch of other cases where we see such an argument. The standard case is about a person, a slave being freed. How do you free a slave? So one of the options of freeing a slave is by giving him a bill of shtar, a paper which says you're freed. You give it to him, once he holds it, he acquires it, and he becomes free. Right? The problem is that whenever a slave acquires something, it automatically belongs to his owner. A slave can't actually acquire anything. If a slave picks up something, it belongs to his owner. So when the owner gives the slave a paper to pick up, essentially it's the owner picking it up, right? Only a free man can acquire things. A slave cannot acquire things. So when a slave picks up the object, he's not really acquiring anything. He's really acquiring it for his owner. So how does he go free? By picking up the bill of... Right? So
doesn't make sense.
The Talmud says, well, once he goes free, a free man can acquire things. So Talmud says when the slave goes free, he owns it, right? At that point, he can acquire things. So because this bill makes him go free, he goes free, and once he's free, he can acquire it. So he can acquire it, which makes him go free, right? Which again is absurd. It's the same way a rabbi can't ordain himself. He can't do this. It's the same logical fallacy, right? Now, we find this in many different forms. For example, you'll find it, let me do it like this. Let me just bring two explanations I've seen to justify this argument. And I'll say it in my own words, so I'll present it differently. Rabbi Yosef Engel mentions both of these, but other rabbis also mention, such as Avnei Nezer and Rabbi Amiel, many others mention the second argument I'm going to present. The first one I'm going to go with is that God is above time. That's the argument here. Yeah. And therefore, chronological things don't matter, as does not cause and effect. So the argument would go as follows. Where do we see these arguments other than this case? So I'll give an example. Now it's after Pesach, right? So we're counting the Omer, right? There's a mitzvah in the Torah to not eat new grains until the Omer sacrifice is brought. The Omer sacrifice makes us allowed to eat those grains. So before those grains are brought, we can't eat. Before the Omer is brought, we can't eat grains because the grains are not kosher. And the Omer sacrifice is what makes the grains kosher, right? What is the Omer sacrifice consistent? What does it consist? It consists grains, right? It entails bringing grains. Now, korban needs to be kosher. So you have the same problem here. How can you bring the Omer sacrifice, which needs to be kosher, if it entails grains, but grains aren't kosher until the Omer is brought? So the Rashba writes that the grains become kosher with the sacrifice, making the sacrifice itself also kosher, making the grains kosher in turn. The two cause each other. Right? Again, the same fallacy. The grains making the korban kosher, or the sacrifice kosher. But the sacrifice is only kosher because it's making the grains kosher. Right? Yeah. So in principle, neither of them should be fine. The grain should remain forbidden, and the sacrifice shouldn't be kosher. All right? So Yosef Engel made the claim that, well, sacrifices are a divine thing. It's for God. It's not for us. It's a divine thing. Because it's a divine thing, it's for God. God doesn't care what comes first and after. For God, before or after, it's all the same. So therefore, and this is not just in time, but also in premise. One comes before the other in principle, right? In philosophical, mathematically, one has to come before two, addition has to come before multiplication. So by God, it's not like that. God is above cause and effect. He's above before and after and these issues. So you could argue to God, it doesn't make a difference if the sacrifice is brought with grains, which are chadash, because the sacrifice makes chadash okay. Chadash makes the sacrifice okay. I mean, the Omer sacrifice makes the grains kosher. the grains being kosher makes the sacrifice kosher. So God is fine with this. God doesn't care God doesn't need the cause to predate the effect. It's only for us who live in a world with time and cause and effect, and in our system they make sense. So therefore, for all divine things, this doesn't matter. We see this even with conversion. So I'll give two examples. The first one is the minchat chinuch. If someone wants to convert to Judaism, you first do the brit milah, you first do the circumcision, the ritual circumcision. After the circumcision, he goes to the mikvah, he goes to the ritual bath. What if he did it the other order? So it's a debate, but let's just accept the position that it's still kosher. So if someone first went to the mikvah, then he went and did the circumcision. When he does the circumcision, he becomes Jewish. So it's the circumcision that makes him Jewish, because he already went to mikvah beforehand, right? What happens if he circumcises himself? Now, let's just assume for a second that the circumcision needs to be done by a Jewish mohel, a Jewish person has to do the circumcision. So he was not circumcised by a Jew because he hadn't become Jew yet. But if it's a kosher, if the brit milah, if the circumcision is kosher, that makes him Jewish, right? Meaning the circumcision was performed by a Jew. So if he circumcised himself, is this considered a kosher conversion? Yeah? Is the question clear? So the minchat chinuch it's an unresolved issue to the minchat chinuch. He did not have an answer. But in Tosfot, we already find a similar idea about conversion. Let's say I walk down the street and I see, a beautiful phone case, and I know my friend would love this phone case. So I can pick up the phone case and I say, I'm going to pick this up for my friend. Right? My friend, this is good for him. He would love to have this, right? And it's good for him. It's not bad for him to acquire this. So when I pick it up, it automatically is as if I acquired it for him because he would want it. Right? It's not a bad thing for him. It's a good thing for him. If it's a bad thing for it, I can't acquire something on his account if it's bad for him. But if it's good for him, I could pick it up for him on his account, right? Now, when we become Jewish, we're essentially becoming Jewish. We're acquiring something. And with this, acquiring Judaism is also a responsibility. If we sin, we get punished for it, right? And if we're non-Jews, eating pork is not a sin. So we're acquiring Judaism, which is we're acquiring something. It's an acquisition, but it's also a responsibility. And if it's a good thing, someone else can pick it up for us. But at the end of the day, it's an acquisition you have to do, which you need to be an adult for. You can't acquire things if you're a child. But again, if I can acquire it, maybe someone else can acquire it on my behalf. So a child who cannot acquire things, other people can acquire it on their behalf. The bet din, the court, can acquire things on their behalf. So just like someone can walk down the street and I can pick up the phone case for my friend, maybe the court can give me my Judaism on my behalf if it's a good thing for me. If it's a bad thing for me, they can't. But if it's a good thing for me, they could. And to be Jewish is considered a good thing. Yeah? However, they could only do this as the bet din, they could do this for Jewish people in the city. But for a non-Jew, they can't acquire a thing on their behalf. If I walk down the street and I pick it up for him, I can't do it on his behalf. The bet din can only do that for Jewish people. So Tosfot says this is not a problem because the child will become Jewish through the conversion. And because he'll become Jewish through the conversion, the bet din can act on his behalf. The court can act on his behalf. Again, the same paradox. So Rabbi Yosef Engel would argue, no problem. Why? God is above time. Becoming Jewish is a spiritual matter. So if someone's becoming Jewish, which is a spiritual matter, doesn't make a difference. If it doesn't make sense, the cause and effect. God is above cause and effect. God is above time. So therefore, to God, causality doesn't matter, right? So therefore, it makes no difference that he wasn't Jewish before the court picked it up. Because becoming Jewish is a spiritual matter, God overlooks the technicalities of this. Rabbi Yosef Engel also argues the same happens with the slave. When you free a slave, the slave becomes Jewish. Right? So it's a spiritual matter. So therefore, the slave can acquire himself, thereby him becoming Jewish. So God is above time. God doesn't care about causality. Now, my explanation of this argument, it's not perfect, but to try and make it a bit more rational, is as follows. We have what I would refer to as philosophical Baim Keechad, or philosophical gito, veyado. This idea when two things cause each other, these are all causative, right? But you also have it philosophically. And I'll give an example. I'll give a few examples. I'll go with one. When a couple gets married, right? So the husband should give the wife the ring, and there's two things happening here. There's the mutual understanding. There's him understanding that he wants to marry her, and her understanding she wants to marry him, right? And that mutual understanding is what makes them married, and acquiring the ring or the money, right, is what we'd refer to as the kinyan. That is what makes this mutual understanding take effect. right? If there is no mutual understanding and he's just giving her a ring, then they're not married. If he gives her a ring and they don't want to get married, that's not a marriage. He has to say it, and she remaining silent. Rabbis in the Talmud, some of the Rishonim explain that it implies that she also agrees to it. Be that as it may, the assumption is that they want to get married. So he gives her a ring. Giving the ring, they want to get married, and giving the ring is an acquisition. If she never acquires the ring, right? She never acquires the ring. They're also not married. Even if they want to get married, you have to give the ring, right? Now, he's not giving the ring as a gift. He's giving the ring in order to get married. If they don't get married, she has to return if the marriage isn't valid, she has to return the ring. The only reason the acquisition works is because they're getting married. So essentially, you've got a philosophical paradox here, right? The only reason she acquires the ring is because they got married. But the only reason they got married is because she acquired the ring, right? So what causes what? So I'm personally not bothered with it. There's no logical fallacy to me here, because this is philosophical. This is a philosophical when two things cause each other. Over here, the one thing causing the other and the other thing causing the first one is the mechanism of how the acquisition works, right? I give a ring to get married, so she's married because she acquired the ring. Philosophically, you have a problem here because the one thing caused the other. But in practice, you don't. The problem would be that she accepted the ring as not as a gift, but as a marriage transaction. So if there is no marriage transaction, she never acquired the ring, so she'll have to return the ring. So what made her accept the ring? What made her acquire the ring? The fact that she did get married. The fact that the marriage worked is what made her acquire it. Otherwise, she'd have to return it. But if they got divorced, the marriage acquisition worked. It's just that the married life didn't work. But if the marriage itself wasn't a valid marriage,
was valid.
If the marriage wasn't valid, they never actually were married ever, then she has to return the ring. It was given to her as a marriage transaction. So if that transaction didn't take effect, she has to return it. Right. So the only reason she acquires the ring in the first place is because they're married from this transaction, right? And the only reason she's married is because she acquired the ring. The mutual understanding doesn't make them married. It's acquiring the ring that makes them married. So you've got a paradox here, right? But no one's bothered by this paradox. Why are people not bothered with this paradox? Because the one thing causing the other is in the mechanism. It's a philosophical one, right? It's not a causative one in the sense that philosophically you've got a problem here. What caused what? But in practice, there is no problem here. I want to argue, this is what Rabbi Yosef Engel meant when he was speaking about, for example, in the Beit HaMikdash, you have the vessels and the sacrifices. You bring the sacrifices in vessels. What makes the sacrifices holy? The fact they're in a holy vessel, right? What makes the vessel holy? The fact that when it was originally used, you used it for a sacrifice, so it's got holy food in it. The vessel becomes holy. So the vessel makes the food holy. The food makes the vessel holy. How can they make each other holy? That's not a problem. Why? Because this is all the mechanism of how God makes stuff holy. We don't care how God makes stuff holy. This is the equivalent of giving the woman the ring. And it's true that they're causing each other. By the end of the day, she received the ring and she's married. We're okay with that. The problem is only with non-spiritual...
Isn't exactly what came first, the chicken or the egg?
No, because with the chicken or the egg, one came before the other. Chicken, egg, chicken, egg, chicken, egg. And the question is, where is the start? Where is the starting point?
What came first, the chicken or the egg?
I don't know what the starting point was, but there's got to be a starting point. No, I understand. But the point is, it's chicken, next stage egg, next stage chicken, next stage egg. And the further back you go, it's going to be either chicken or egg, right? It's not that they both caused each other. We just don't know where the line starts. At some point, it starts.
Right.
At some point, it's either chicken or egg. We don't know what it is. So it's a 50-50. Over here, they both causing each other.
Fine.
Again, it's like the rabbi ordaining himself.
The chicken and the egg cause each other as well. I don't see a difference.
How do they cause each other?
Well,
The very first one was either a chicken or egg, right?
No.
The point is an egg doesn't require, the chicken creating an egg doesn't require this egg to create that chicken, right? It would have been another egg. So the real question is, what's the first one, the egg or the chicken? But in each stage, it's either an egg or a chicken, right? Over here, the paradox is that the two things are causing each other. Again, this would be like the example I gave in the beginning, I think is the perfect example, a rabbi ordaining himself. He needs to be a rabbi to ordain someone as a rabbi, but by ordaining himself as a rabbi, he is a rabbi, right? That's the paradox. Asking who was the first rabbi is not a question. One made another one rabbi, and at a certain point, you had the number one rabbi, right? That's the chicken and the egg. Chicken, egg, chicken, egg. What was the first one? Over here, the paradox is that they're both causing each other. That's what makes it so tricky. And I feel like it's only a question with a causative measure. Like, I'll give an example. The Ktsot HaChoshen asks, yes, an interesting question. If let's say I want to give someone a gift, right? So what do I want to give them? I want to gift them my house. Right? Now, in my house, I can put a table. And when I give him the house and the table, I give him the bill for the house. And with the house, also the table becomes his. Right? So when I give someone something, with giving it to him, also objects in the house become his. What happens if I gift him the house with a bill and I put the bill in the house? Right? So if the house becomes his, then the bill is his, so the bill makes it his. But if the house never became his, the bill won't make it his because it's not in his house. So what do we say? That because this bill makes the house his, therefore also the bill becomes his. Is it too complicated or should I explain? I'll explain the question. If I gift you a house, right, and in the house is a table, the house also becomes yours. Provided the house becomes yours, anything in the house also becomes yours. Right? So if there's a house, and I write a bill, I hereby give you this house, and I put the bill inside the house. Does this house and bill become yours? Well, seemingly not, because if the house isn't yours, the bill won't become yours just because it's in the house.
But you gave me the house, and now the bill's mine.
Well, how did I give you the house? What?
Oh, I see.
The contract.
The bill gives you the house.
The bill gives you the house.
Yeah.
But again, if the house is yours, then anything in the house becomes yours, including the bill. So would I argue that because the house becomes mine, if the bill becomes mine, then the bill could make the house mine? It's absurd, right?
Yeah, the bill is intellectual.
Well, how is it different to a slave picking up the bill of acquiry? Yeah, it's a very so the different answers. Rabbi Yosef Engel would respond, well, a slave becoming free is a religious matter. God's above time. Giving you a gift, that's not God's matter, that's human. By us, we have logical fallacies. We care about cause and effect. God doesn't, right? The Ksot HaChoshen himself answers the difference. The difference in his mind was, there's a difference between giving, right, giving something, and acquiring something. So, when, for example, when you to get divorced, the woman doesn't have to acquire something. But for something, so all she has to do is to pick up the bill. For a slave to be freed, he argued the same. The slave doesn't have to make an acquisition of the bill. It simply has to become his. He has to pick it up. So therefore, we could say it becomes his hand with it. But an acquisition is causative. That's less mechanical, so to say. The difference the Ksot over here is making is that there's a difference between picking something up, v'natan veyado, you put it in your hand.
Right.
And so it is a form of acquisition, but the point isn't the acquisition. It's it being by you, as opposed to a sale from one person to another, whether it's a gift or a purchase.
It's your right.
Well, whether it's a purchase or a gift, the legal mechanism of one person giving something to another person is different. So my stipulation would be, that the primary difference is that when people buy and sell from each other, we have laws in the land, right? We establish for how one person gives something to another person, right? And these are laws of acquisition. But laws which govern social statuses between people, marital position, like husband, wife, etc., or slave and... Right? So over here, it's not really, does this thing belong to me or not? It's more about how I'm connected to people. So you don't acquire your freedom. You don't acquire your being married or being divorced status. It's just a bill to represent where I am and who I am, right? As would be with all those cases. But when an object belongs to me, so I acquire the object, there's a more ontological acquisition happening where this now is mine. So that to make it mine is different than, I think, again, this is my interpretation of it. I don't really fully understand this either. Anyways, that's his explanation. Again, following what I was saying earlier, you could argue that the difference is, like Rabbi Yosef Engel argued, that when the question is about the mechanism, right, God wants a certain result. God wants this person to be Jewish, right? His soul, the Jewish soul enters the body, or whatever it is, right? So if the legal mechanism is irrational, that would be the equivalent of for us saying, if the marriage acquisition is irrational because the only reason she becomes married is because she acquired the ring, and the only reason she acquired the ring is because she's married, right? But when it comes to governing between humans, such as buying and selling, you could argue over that as a bigger fallacy, which is that the mechanism, which is the paradox here, is the very thing we're dealing with, right? It's not like God said, make him Jewish, and how, we don't care if it makes sense or not, right? That's how I'm understanding Rabbi Yosef Engel's argument, that when it comes to divine things, it's different. Just before I finish, I want to mention also the Avnei Nezer argument and Udeime, those that learn like him. And I think it's a very, very logical argument because it deals with another problem. I like this one also, with the exception of this problem. A woman, when she gets married, let's say a woman has a big house and she gets married, So now the husband gets the right to this house as long as they're married. When they get divorced, it's again hers. But as long as they're married, the husband has what's called kinyan peirot. He has the right to the fruit of the field and to use the house. The parameters of this are complicated. Like, for example, could you bring vegetables or fruit that grow on this as bikurim? Is it yours or not? Is it your land? Is it not your land? These are all interesting questions. But the premise is that it's essentially the woman's house. It was hers before they got married. When they get divorced, it becomes hers again. What happens if the husband places the bill of divorce in this house?
Again, it's the same thing.
So the Talmud says this is considered a valid divorce because being that when she gets divorced, the house becomes hers. So he put it in her position because now it's hers, now that she's divorced, right? So this doesn't really work because there's nothing more, you're not more divine or more, spiritual if you're single or married. That doesn't make a difference. Some would argue you're even more spiritual after when you're married than when you're divorced. So, right? So you can't really argue this argument Rabbi Yosef Engel was presenting to this case. So the argument, he mentions also this argument briefly, but Avnei Nezer likes it, and many, Rabbi Amiel mentions this, I also saw Chabad Rabbi Isaac Shvei discuss this. So it's quite a prominent theory in the field, and I'll present it the way I understand it. So everyone uses weird terminology around it. Whenever, comes down to the topic which we discussed earlier, it's a philosophical question of natural law. And by natural law, I don't mean ethics. I mean law which is just natural. If I pick something up, it's mine. If I create something, it's mine. Certain laws which are not government or court or God ordained laws, it's just the way it is, right? If someone picks something up, he can use it. Not because it's mine or because someone said it's mine or because I can use it, right? It's just how the world is. I pick something, I can use it, right? If I create something, it's mine, right? The philosophy of ownership is different to the laws of ownership, right? Why we own something is not because God said, that's already another debate, but for now, let's just assume the reason I own something is not because God said, because the court said, because the reason I own something is because I own it. The philosophy of ownership. But then, do I actually own it or not? The court has the right to say, no, you don't own it, give it to him, right? In a communist system, everything is taken away by the government. In practice, you have laws which govern ownership. But the philosophy of ownership is different to the laws of ownership. In the philosophy of ownership, you'll have a very bizarre world, because you'll have a world where people, spend hours creating an art, and you won't be able to sell it, because what gives him the right? Just because I gave it to him, it's still mine. I still created it. If I create a beautiful painting, a good example for this would be the Uncle Moshe, he's a children's entertainer, and he worked for a certain company, and they fired him and they replaced him with another person. And he believed, since he created the character, it was like a children's character, he believed he owns the character. The company doesn't have that he worked for, who paid for everything, don't have the right to remove the character from him. He is the character. And they had a court case about this. Now, in a world where the Uncle Moshes would win in these kind of cases, right, you won't really have a properly functioning society. It kind of is the government's job at some point, at some times, to do what's wrong, so to say, right? For government to establish laws and punishments and laws of ownership, not because they're ontologically right, not because they're philosophically his or hers, or rather because you need laws to govern what makes someone something, to avoid theft, for example, right? So the government says this is yours, and if you take it from him, you can go to jail for theft, right? So you need laws at the end of the day, and often the legals will contradict the philosophy of ownership, if you will, right? This is a conflict you always have. So, for example, you've got a company and they hire, I know communists love to argue something along this line. You've got a company and the owner spends $1 million, builds the company, buys wood, and then you've got workers who build tables. So the worker is going to argue, just because he paid for it, right? That makes no difference. I am the one that created the table. That time owned the wood. The table is mine. I created the table. And the owner will say, Arai Ashbach, it's my wood which became better. So yes, the value that was added to it from wood to table, that's yours. But that which I'm selling here is the wood, not the table. The ownership of the difference between wood and the table is intangible. You can't sell that difference. It might have a monetary value, but you can't own it, you can't move it. Wood is wood. The difference between a log and a table is only philosophical. And while it's true that the worker owns it, right, in a legal, unless you're a communist, you won't really be able to have a legal system where the worker owns it. And if you do, no one's ever going to want to open a company because you'll never be able to profit off it, right? At the end of the day, philosophically it's right that the worker owns the table, not the wood, but the difference between a log and a table, that philosophical difference, That belongs to the worker. He created that. He created it, it's his. But there's a contradiction here between what's inherently right and how a country should be governed, how society should run. Right? And this is a constant conflict with monetary law. It's always going to be a conflict between what's actually right and what's legally right. A slave should pick, when a slave picks something up, it really is the slave's. He picked it up, it should be his. However, if every time a slave picks something up, right, and it doesn't go to the owner, you don't have slavery, right? That's not what slavery is. So if you have the institution of slavery, you can't then also have the institution of the slave-owned stuff, right? If the slave works in the field of the owner and he makes fruit, and you'll say, well, the fruit belongs to the slave, you don't have a slave. That's not what a slave is. If you want to concede and live in a world where slavery exists, you cannot then also say that we'll follow the philosophical ownership. Same applies to marital life. Philosophically speaking, when a woman, let's say, makes money, it should be hers, not her husband's. When a husband makes money, it should be his and not the wife's. But for the sake of any shared life to work in raising a family and everything, there has to be a certain, okay, I'll give up mine, you give up yours, and we'll live together. That just has to be done for the sake of a marriage. Otherwise, you'll have a very hard, maybe today I think that actually that is advised by many people. But traditionally speaking, to have a normal life, the woman just says, okay, you deal with the finances, I'll deal with this, and that's just how they lived. That being said, if the woman picks something up, it really is hers, it's not her husband's. The house that belonged to her before marriage is really hers. When something goes into here, the ontological reality is that this belongs to her, not to him. Right? Just like the character Uncle Moshe should belong to Uncle Moshe, not to Soki and Ding. Right? So the law of gito veyado comes and explains like this. When
use that reference.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. The premise of the Talmud we're discussing here works like this. When the slave picks up the bill of ammunition, just like anything else, he's really acquiring it for himself. There's an external force coming and saying, well, to govern society, we need laws of slavery. So therefore, even although really it is yours, we'll pretend like it's not yours so the government could, establish laws and live properly and function. Really, it's yours, right? Really, right now you acquired it for yourself. Philosophical ownership, it's yours. However, the legal side of things will say it's not yours, right? But if this thing I'm acquiring actually means that even legally it should be mine, then we don't care the fact that legally it's preventing it from becoming yours because it is really yours. Actually, ontologically, philosophically, it is yours. It's just a legal thing holding it back from becoming yours. Therefore, since really it is yours already philosophically, we don't care about this legal part which is holding it back from becoming yours. And therefore we say it does make you free and you could acquire it even legally. The same applies to the woman. The bill of divorce enters the woman's field, right? Really it's her field, so anything that goes in it should be hers. However, the rabbis came and said, for the sake of marriages, we'll assume and we'll pretend like that's not really what's happening. We'll pretend like it's the husband's. Because it fell in there, now it's going to be his. It's not really his, it's really hers, but the law is going to ignore the reality and we're going to pretend like it's his. But if this bill, the very bill that becomes hers now, actually means the husband won't be acquiring these things, this bill that fell in here, which really is hers, actually is the one, the bill itself is saying that they should not belong to that person, right? In this case, you cannot say, well, no. I'm sorry, in this case, you won't say, no, the bill belongs to him, not to her. No, because really the bill itself is saying it should belong to her, and it really is hers, so we don't care about the legal mechanism holding it back from becoming hers. So we'll say, no, even legally, it's going to become hers. And this is also the answer to the question I asked earlier about the house. If you're selling a house and you put the bill of acquisition in the house, there's no reason to assume it should be the receiver's, right? When I give you a house and the bill of transaction is in the house, it never became yours. There's no reason to assume the house should be yours or the bill should be yours. Over here, there is a reason to assume it should be hers, because really, philosophically, it is hers already. It's just the law holding it back, so we'll just ignore the law if the bill itself makes even the law agree that it's going to be hers. But when I'm giving you a house and the bill which would make it yours is only becoming yours if the house is yours, why should it be yours? There's no reason to assume it should be yours. It works for almost all the examples with the exception of some of them which are more spiritual based.